The first group of kidnappers said I had to pay $3,500. They blindfolded all of us and chained our hands and legs together. They threatened to remove our organs if we didn't pay. Even though my family paid, they didn't release me, but instead sold me to a second group. The second kidnapper said we had to pay them $33,000 because they had bought us from the first group, so we had to help them get their money back. They beat me with a metal rod. They dripped molten plastic on my back. They beat the soles of my feet, and then they forced me to stand for long periods of time, sometimes for days. Sometimes they threatened to kill me and put a gun to my head. They hung me from the ceiling so that my legs couldn't reach the floor, and they gave me electric shocks. One person died after they hung him from the ceiling for 24 hours. We watched him die. Whenever I called my relatives, I asked them to pay. They burnt me with a hot iron rod so I would scream on the phone. We could not protect the women in our group. They just took them out, raped them, and brought them back. They hardly let us sleep, and I thought I was going to die. But in the end, a group of us managed to escape. These are the words of a 23-year-old Eritrean man kidnapped by traffickers near Sudan's Shagharab refugee camp in 2012. These traffickers handed him over to Egyptian traffickers in southern Egypt, who held him in the Sinai with 24 other men and 8 women for 6 weeks. This is one story of a Sinai trafficking victim. One story of at least 30,000 of those who have been trafficked in the Sinai. The Sinai Peninsula is a peninsula in Egypt which borders Israel and lies between the Mediterranean and Red Sea. This region, that is only 23,000 square miles, about the size of West Virginia, is seen as the last stop before a new beginning to many from Sudan and Eritrea. In 1998 to 2000, the Eritrean and Ethiopian War occurred over the control over the border town Badme. Both countries wanted this town for themselves, despite Badme not having any rich natural resources. This war resulted in 70,000 deaths and countless communities displaced. Despite the end of this war in 2000, Eritrea has engaged in border skirmishes with its neighbor Djibouti in 2008 and again with Ethiopia in 2012. These conflicts continue to affect Eritrean communities, and the Eritrean government uses these border disputes to justify suspending the constitution, banning the press, and other human rights abuses. Then we have Sudan, who has conflict internally, the most famous being the war in Darfur. Conflict in the Darfur region in Sudan, which is Western Sudan, began in early 2003. The Sudan Liberation Movement and the Justice and Equality Movement rebel groups began fighting the government of Sudan, who they accused of oppressing Darfur's non-Arab population. In response, the Sudanese government committed acts of ethnic cleansing against Darfur's non-Arabs. A ceasefire was signed in 2010. However, there were hundreds of thousands who died, and millions of Sudanese people were displaced and forced into refugee camps. The former United States Secretary of State Colin Powell said the Darfur conflict was genocide and called it the worst humanitarian crisis of the 21st century. These are the circumstances that have made hundreds of thousands of Eritreans and Sudanese people flee towards Israel and Europe for a better life and more opportunities. However, traffickers used this desperation to their advantage and trafficked thousands attempting to make this journey. A common tactic of these traffickers is to kidnap migrants as they enter eastern Sudan at the border, kidnap them from refugee camps in the Shagharab camps, and some have even been kidnapped from their homes or local areas. Those kidnapped are then transported in horrible conditions, with many dying because of malnutrition, dehydration, or other forms of maltreatment. And those that make the journey to Sinai are subjected to even more torture, physically, sexually, and psychologically. The abuse these victims experience is extensive, consisting of severe beatings with wooden sticks and metal rods, electric shocks, deprivation of food and water, burning with cigarettes and melted plastic, or even having their fingernails pulled out. Victims are also chained to each other, forced to stand, sometimes naked, for extended periods of time. Both men and women are subjected to grave sexual violence and raped in front of each other. They are urinated on and sometimes set on fire after gasoline is poured on their bodies. These traffickers extort money from their victims and their families. At first, they demand a ransom payment for a few thousand to $10,000. However, as time progressed, these traffickers became bolder, requesting ransom payments from $35,000 to $60,000. Nearly all these victims are unable to pay the exorbitant amount of money being requested and are forced to call their families to help pay for their freedom. Much of these torture taxes listed previously are applied during these phone calls. They want them to hear their loved ones being tortured and abused to force them to come up with a ransom payment. Those that are able to pay may be released, or they may be sent to another group of traffickers who implement the same tactics but at a higher ransom payment. And those that are not able to pay through money, pay with their bodies. Victims unable to meet the ransom demand may lose their eyes, a kidney, a liver, or some other vital organ. Doctors come to the camp, choose the individuals they want, take their organ, and dispose of their body in the desert. These bodies found in the desert show evidence that these refugees had these organs stolen from them while they were still alive. The Sinai Peninsula is largely controlled by nomadic Bedouin tribes who barely tolerate or welcome outsiders. Many of these tribes are known for their illicit trading, whether that be trading of cars, marijuana, drugs, weapons, or people. Smuggling and contraband are the economy of this region, which is able to continue because of the lack of intervention by the Egyptian police. And the trafficking of refugees is the second most lucrative trade of the region behind weapons trade. It is more profitable than drug dealing. It is more profitable than prostitution. The Sawara tribe is known for smuggling in the Sinai. However, the Sawara insists that only rogue individuals in their tribe are responsible for the trafficking of these refugees. Although many in the community know this trafficking exists in the specific location where these abuses take place, not many are able to fight against it. While it seems like all is lost for those who prey to these traffickers, there are those in the region that are doing what they can to prevent these human rights abuses and help those who have been victimized. Sheiks in the Sinai are forcing traffickers out of business by convincing other businesses to boycott them. They have helped ban trafficking from entering certain areas in the region. That way, if a victim escapes the camp, these traffickers do not dare enter people's land to recapture them. A Bedouin religious leader of the Sawara tribe, Sheikh Mohammed, has turned his home into a safe house for Eritreans and those who are able to escape the traffickers. He gives these survivors food, basic health care, and shelter. The United Nations Refugee Agency has also established relations with sheiks such as Mohammed to provide resources and provisions to be taken to Cairo where these victims can receive more care. The sheiks in the Sinai region have helped reduce the amount of trafficking in the Sinai, but there is still more action that needs to be done to prevent trafficking further and support the victims. The United Nations needs to partner with social workers to combat this issue, while providing for survivors with needs such as food, basic health care, and shelter is a good starting point. Social workers can partner with the UN to bring about awareness of trafficking in the Sinai, especially in the areas that traffickers are known to use for kidnapping their victims. However, individuals will still attempt the journey and put themselves at risk if they believe they have no better option. So there needs to be more support poured into these communities who have been displaced by the violence in their country. There needs to be shown an opportunity that things can get better and that they do not have to resort to going to Israel and have the risk of being trafficked by these people. As for those who are survivors of this form of trafficking, clinical social workers should help diagnose any mental, behavioral, and emotional issues that have resulted from their trafficking experience, and from there help them learn how to manage and cope with what they have been through. Social workers can help these victims reintegrate back into society and give them the time and tools they need to recover before returning back to their families. In addition, social workers can support the families who have also been emotionally abused by these traffickers and help them regain control over their lives. The conflict in Sudan and Eritrea has caused thousands to travel in search of a better life elsewhere. Some who have endeavored on this journey reach their destination, while others, as we have seen, are kidnapped and trafficked in the Sinai, resulting in various forms of torture, extortion, and death. Those that escape still live with the mental and physical scars of their experience. There are those in the region who are taking a stand to prevent this trafficking and support the victims who have escaped, but there is still work that needs to be done. We listen to these stories and say, never again this, never again that, never again will this atrocity happen. But when will our words stop being just words? When will this phrase, never again, stop being an empty promise? But when will our words actually lead to action? And when will this action actually lead to change? Thank you.